Hello, everyone. Welcome to a story full of surprises and unexpected twists. Just imagine a powerful CEO famous for her strict no dating employees rule. But then her heart gets stolen by a single dad, doing the simplest job in the building, the janitor. Sounds crazy, right? Yet it's within this seemingly impossible gap that we find hilarious moments, unexpected romance, and gentle healing that will make you smile before falling asleep. Over the course of 8 chapters, you'll witness every step of transformation, from doubt and distance to understanding, trust, and love. There will be moments that make you laugh, moments that tug at your heart, and sweet moments warm enough to feel like a safe embrace. This isn't just a love story. It's a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things come from where we least expect them. So sit back, relax, and let your heart wander into a world of love, laughter, and tenderness. And don't forget to hit subscribe and tap the little bell so you won't miss any of our future stories. Trust me, you'll leave this video with a smile, a warm heart, and the best night's sleep. This morning, the glass and steel skyscraper looked like a fortress armored against the world. People often say these towers aren't just monuments of economic power. They're modern fortresses, places where emotions are locked away behind walls of rules and reputations. And standing at the very top of this fortress was her, Alicia Johnson, the black woman CEO whose sharp mind, blade-like gaze, and unshakable rule had become legendary. No dating employees. That rule didn't come from nowhere. In the corporate world, especially in America, after the Me Too movement shook the biggest boardrooms, the line between office romance and career-ending scandal is thinner than a strand of hair. Alicia knew better than anyone. One wrong look, one whispered rumor, and she could go from being a role model to a front-page disaster. That morning, Alicia strode into the lobby. The click of her heels on the marble floor echoed like a drumbeat of authority. Staff along the corridor immediately hushed. Some pretended to bury their eyes in their laptops. Others bowed respectfully. No one dared slip. One icy glance from her could burn itself into memory forever. And yet, amusingly enough, there was one man who didn't flinch at all, the janitor. Tall frame, faded blue uniform, mop in hand like a weapon for some invisible battle. His hair was a little messy, but his eyes, bright and strangely calm. Alicia frowned slightly as she passed him, not out of disdain, but out of discomfort. In a world where everyone seemed to fear her presence, here was this man, utterly unfazed. He even whistled softly, a classical tune familiar, but unplaceable. A flicker of irony ran through her mind. They say only the CEO can walk calmly in this building, and yet, so can he. What Alicia didn't know was that, within days, this very calmness would begin to crack the steel walls around her heart. Nor could she imagine that behind that mop and worn uniform was an entire hidden world of pain, responsibility, and a love strong enough to challenge every rule she had ever lived by. Morning meetings were always a ritual of power. The 42nd floor boardroom gleamed under LED lights, a glass table stretching across the room, surrounded by tense faces. Alicia sat at the head, her eyes sharp enough to slice through every chart and number on the screen. The air felt heavy, every breath weighted down by expectation. The CFO nervously presented the quarterly results. The graph on the projector told the truth. Revenues had dipped. Silence thickened, waiting for the storm. Alicia didn't need to raise her voice. Just one short command was enough to chill the room. "Explain." The man swallowed hard, fumbling with words, sounding more like a student caught cheating by a ruthless professor than a high-ranking executive. And then, just as the tension peaked, a sound interrupted it all. Crack. The door swung open. Every head turned. And there he was again, the janitor, mop in hand, face calm, sweat soaking through the back of his faded uniform. He stepped inside, bowing slightly. "Sorry, I thought this room was empty. I'll come back later." A ripple of reactions swept the room. Some employees covered their mouths to hide a chuckle. Others looked horrified, bracing for Alicia's fury. But strangely, Alicia didn't explode. She just glanced at him, eyes icy, then gave a slight nod. Close the door. The janitor smiled politely, pulled the door shut, and his footsteps faded away. Yet in those few seconds the suffocating pressure in the room eased. A few employees exhaled as if time itself had paused for a heartbeat. Alicia, ever stern, couldn't help but think, how is it that even in the tensest moments he remains so calm? Is it stupidity or courage? And that was the first collision. Accidental, fleeting, but undeniable, between her world and his. By noon, the building had emptied out a little. Employees scattered to nearby cafes or gathered in the 10th floor pantry. Alicia rarely ate with anyone. Her routine was always the same: a healthy salad box, a few slices of dark bread, and a cup of black Americano. The diet of the busy and disciplined. Keeps you slim, saves you time. She stepped into the pantry, only to be greeted by something unusual: laughter. Light, bubbling laughter that didn't seem to belong in this tension-filled skyscraper. Alicia frowned slightly and turned her gaze to the far corner. And there he was. The janitor. He was sitting on a plastic chair across from a little girl, no older than 8 or 9. She wore a school uniform, her curly hair tied up high, her bright eyes sparkling with joy. On the table sat a modest lunchbox, a couple of sandwiches, a red apple, a packet of cheap cookies. The janitor, no, the father, was telling a funny story, his voice playful, making his daughter laugh until her cheeks flushed. Alicia paused. The scene was oddly disarming. In her world, children were tucked away in elite private schools, lunches served in stainless steel containers, supervised by nannies and chauffeurs. But here was a single father, stealing a precious lunch break to sit with his daughter, splitting an apple as though it were a feast. Her chest tightened for a moment. Something stirred inside her, something she couldn't quite name. She forced herself to dismiss it, whispering inwardly, "Don't be foolish. This is nothing but an ordinary scene. Don't let emotions get in the way." But just as she turned to leave, their eyes met. His gaze wasn't servile, nor curious, nor judgmental. It was calm, genuine, as if he saw her as nothing more, nothing less than a human being. And for the first time in years, Alicia felt as though someone had looked right past her armor. By late afternoon, the sunset spilled through the glass, walls bathing the office in hues of orange and gold. To anyone else it might have looked poetic, but for Alicia, it was nothing but another backdrop to endless files stacked high, buzzing emails, and a mind that never stopped grinding. She tried to focus, but the scene from the pantry replayed in her head. The girl's bubbling laughter, the rough hands splitting an apple in two, and that calm, steady gaze. Of all the moments she had witnessed in her career, why was this one haunting her? Frustrated, Alicia rose and walked to the window. The city below pulsed with chaos. Honking cars, neon lights flickering on. "This is my world," she told herself. A world of power and responsibility, where emotions are weakness and rules are armor. Yet fate had its irony. From the floor below drifted the sound of sweeping. Alicia glanced down. The janitor was cleaning the lobby. His movements weren't rushed. Each stroke of the broom was steady, almost deliberate, as if he were sweeping away not just dust, but the day's exhaustion itself. Beside him, the little girl sat reading a book, legs swinging freely. In that fleeting moment, Alicia saw something foreign to her life. Freedom. A man with a simple job, free from suffocating rules, sitting there with his daughter, smiling, living honestly. A sharp pang of fear cut through her chest. If one day I lost everything, would anyone still look at me with that kind of calm? She drew a long breath, turned back to her desk, and slipped on her familiar mask of control. But deep down, she knew something had begun to shift, and perhaps that accidental encounter was never accidental at all. The next morning, rain drizzled over the city. Everything looked gray, people rushing through the streets as if racing against the clock. Alicia entered the skyscraper, face cold as ever, black umbrella still dripping with rain. But in the lobby, a scene stopped her in her tracks. The janitor was bent over his mop, and beside him, the same little girl from yesterday. She clutched a math workbook, frowning deeply at the numbers. "I can't do it. It's too hard," she pouted, frustrated. The man chuckled softly, lowering his voice with warmth. "Listen, sweetheart. Math is just like mopping a floor. At first it looks messy, but if you take it little by little, one row at a time, it gets clean. Just break it down and work through it." Alicia stood a few feet away, amused. A janitor comparing math to floor mopping? Absurd. Yet, strangely enough, the girl blinked, then tried again. Minutes later, a smile spread across her face. She had solved it. "See? I told you, you're smart." He patted her head with quiet pride. Something tugged at Alicia. She remembered her own childhood. Long nights wrestling with homework alone, parents too busy to sit beside her. She had learned strength early, but strength had always come paired with loneliness. A raindrop fell from her umbrella, splashing onto her stiletto heel. Startled, Alicia turned briskly, walking away before anyone could see the flicker in her eyes. But inside, she knew. In just 2 short days, this janitor and his little girl had already shaken the armor of the Iron CEO. That afternoon, the 15th floor hallway was quiet. Alicia had just ended a tense call with a client, her sharp words still echoing in her ears. She strode quickly, heels clacking like a heartbeat of anger. But as she turned the corner, she stopped short. A mop bucket and wet floor blocked her path. Her eyes narrowed instantly. And of course, the culprit was there. The janitor. He was bent over, mopping diligently, seemingly oblivious to the presence of the office queen herself. "Do you know this area isn't supposed to be used at this hour?" Alicia's voice was cold, tinged with irritation. The man looked up, his eyes bright, calm in a way that disarmed her. He smiled. "Apologies, ma'am. I just thought cleaning the floor would make it safer for employees to walk through. But if it bothers you, I can move elsewhere." It was polite, yes, but not servile, almost lightly defiant, as if he were saying, "I'm just doing my job. You, on the other hand, might need to relax." Alicia froze for a second. No employee had ever dared speak to her like that. They either cowered in fear or bent over backward to please her. But this man, in his faded uniform, stood there steady, unfazed. "What's your name?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "David," he replied simply. The name echoed in her mind oddly. So ordinary for a man who seemed anything. But Alicia glanced at the floor and noticed the wet footprints. Her own. The realization struck. She was the one making a mess, not him. The discomfort stung, but mingled with it was a flicker of something she refused to name. Curiosity. She walked past him. Her voice clipped. "Next time, avoid peak hours." David gave a slight nod. No excuses, no defense, just that faint, calm smile, a mirror reflecting her back at herself. The stronger she tried to appear, the more transparent her weariness became, and Alicia hated it, hated that a stranger with a mop could make her see herself so clearly. That night, the building was nearly empty. Alicia sat in her office, a pool of yellow light spilling across stacks of files. She was used to being the last one to leave. In this world, success was measured in overtime hours, and she never lost. The clock ticked. Then another sound broke through, the faint cry of a child. At first, Alicia thought she was imagining it, but the sound grew louder, shaky and broken. She opened her door. At the end of the hallway, beneath the cold glow of fluorescent lights, the little girl sat curled on the floor, knees hugged to her chest. David knelt before her, trying to soothe her but clearly struggling. "I don't want Mom to leave. I miss her." The girl sobbed, her small voice shattering. Alicia froze. All she had ever seen of David, his calm, his quiet smile, vanished in that moment. Before her was simply a father, clumsy and aching, trying to comfort his daughter against a loss he couldn't mend. David pulled the girl into his arms, his voice gentle but lined with pain. "I'm here. I'll never leave you. You can cry, you can hurt, but you'll never be alone, okay?" Alicia's throat tightened. The sight struck her like a blow, dragging up memories she had buried long ago. Nights spent alone as a child, waiting for parents to return from late shifts, teaching herself to choke back tears in the name of strength. But that strength had only ever been armor against loneliness. For the first time, Alicia didn't know what to do. She stood there silently, watching a man in a faded uniform hold his daughter as if she were the entire world. And in that stillness, she realized power, money, prestige, none of it compared to an embrace that said, "You're loved." A sharp lump rose in her throat. She turned quickly, not wanting anyone to see her eyes glisten, but it was too late. David had already looked up and his gaze met hers. No words were spoken, but it was enough. The wall between them had cracked once more. The next morning, something felt different the moment Alicia stepped into the office. Instead of the usual silence, there were hushed whispers, darting glances, the subtle hum of gossip drifting down the hallways. Eyes dropped quickly when she looked their way, but not quickly enough to hide the curiosity, even the amusement. In the boardroom, a young assistant placed a file on the table, her hands trembling. She muttered under her breath, "They say the boss stayed late last night and, someone saw—" Alicia's head snapped up, her stare cutting like glass. Silence fell instantly. But she didn't need anyone to spell it out. The rumors had started, whispers that the powerful CEO might somehow be involved with the janitor. Ridiculous. Alicia clenched her fists, rage burning through her chest. She had spent her whole life proving that a black woman could climb to the very top, breaking every barrier in her way. And now, just one fleeting glance in a hallway, and they were ready to drag her down with cheap gossip. By noon, she sat in her office, staring at her laptop but unable to focus. Inside, two battles raged. One voice screamed, "Don't let emotions destroy everything you've built." Never. The other whispered, the memory of his calm eyes, the warmth of his arms wrapped around his little girl. For the first time in years, Alicia felt uncertain. The rule, no dating employees, had always been her shield, but now it felt like a cage, locking away her heart while freedom lingered just beyond reach. She rose, yanking the curtains open. Outside, the city moved on. Loud, relentless, indifferent, but inside her, one question echoed louder than all the noise. Will I go on living as a lonely queen, or risk it all to be a woman? The third day began with an all-company meeting. Over 100 employees filled the grand hall, bright lights blazing, tension heavy as a storm about to break. Alicia stood at the podium, her voice sharp, each word cutting like a blade. Revenue dropped last quarter. This isn't the time for excuses. It's the time for action. If you can't keep up, you'll be replaced. The room fell silent, like everyone had swallowed a stone. Eyes darted nervously, pens scratched frantically. Alicia drew a breath to continue when suddenly a loud crash echoed from the back. Every head turned. David. He had accidentally tipped over his mop bucket, water spilling across the floor. A few employees snickered, others shook their heads. With thinly veiled contempt, Alicia froze for a fraction of a second. Two instincts collided inside her: lash out to protect her image, or let it pass. What stunned her most was her own heart. It didn't feel irritated. Instead, it felt protective. David quickly picked up the mop, bowing slightly. "Apologies for the interruption." His voice was calm, neither fearful nor flustered. Yet behind those steady eyes, Alicia glimpsed a shadow of weariness. The room hung tense, waiting for her reaction. If she was too lenient, Rumors would roar to life. If she came down hard, she would betray something fragile growing inside her. At last, Alicia spoke. "Continue. Just one word, but enough to leave the hall stunned. No reprimand, no icy glare." She resumed her speech, but inside she knew. That single moment had carved another crack in the armor of the Iron CEO. When the meeting ended, whispers rippled like a tide. And as Alicia left the hall, she caught David's gaze. No smile, no bow, just a steady look, asking silently, "Who are you, really?" After the meeting, Alicia headed straight back to her office. She needed air, but as she stepped into the long corridor, she saw David, still cleaning up the water spill from earlier. He wasn't flustered, just mopping steadily, as if nothing had happened. Alicia paused for a moment, then strode forward, her voice sharp. "Do you realize how badly you disrupted an important meeting?" David looked up, his gaze calm, steady. "I do, and I apologized. But if you'd like, I can mop faster. Maybe fast enough to keep pace with your heels." The words weren't loud, but they hit her like a strike. For the first time, someone dared to throw irony back at her relentless pace. "Did you just mock me?" Alicia narrowed her eyes. "No, just a fact." David shrugged, continuing to mop. "People trip most often when they move too fast, especially on a wet floor." Silence stretched. Alicia wasn't upset because he was wrong, but because he was right. When had she turned her life into a constant sprint, never even looking at where her feet landed? She turned to leave, but her lips betrayed her with a question she hadn't meant to ask. "Your name? David, right? Do you always talk like this?" David stopped, met her eyes, and smiled faintly. "Only when someone needs reminding that life is more than numbers and pressure." That smile, calm, genuine, sent her heartbeat off rhythm. Alicia turned quickly, hiding the shift inside her chest. But deep down she knew this conversation had planted a seed, and sooner or later it would grow. A sudden storm rolled in that afternoon. Thunder boomed against the windows, the sky swallowed by gray. Inside, employees tried to stay focused, pretending not to hear the wind howling. Then the lights went out. The entire 20th floor was swallowed by darkness. A scream erupted from accounting. Then another. The backup generator didn't kick in fast enough, and panic began to spread. Phone screens flickered like fireflies in the dark. Alicia stood still, forcing herself to stay calm. She despised chaos. But just as she reached for her phone to call tech support, a shout came from the hallway. "Watch out! There's water flooding the end of the corridor." Her heel slipped on the wet floor. Alicia staggered, about to fall, when a strong hand caught her arm. In the faint glow she saw him. David. He didn't waste words, just raised a small flashlight. "Follow me." For a split second, Alicia wanted to protest. She was the CEO. People followed her, not the other way around. But in that moment of chaos, instinct told her to trust the man gripping her hand. David guided them down the dark corridor, steering around puddles, steadying frightened employees. His voice was calm, assured, steady enough to slow the panic. Alicia followed just behind, feeling the warmth of his hand anchoring her. A strange, unfamiliar safety. By the time they reached the emergency stairwell, the backup lights finally flickered on. Alicia pulled her hand back quickly, straightened, and cloaked herself in her familiar cold composure. But her heart was still racing, not from fear, but from the hand that had steadied her in the dark. She glanced sideways at David. He only nodded, as if nothing had happened. But Alicia knew better. It wasn't just a blackout. It was a lightning flash, illuminating the truth she had tried to deny. The next morning, the lights were back on. But the company buzzed with something different. Whispers drifted through the halls, like a draft sneaking under every door. I heard the CEO was trapped in the dark with the janitor. Yeah, someone swore they saw them holding hands. No way. The Iron Queen? Really? Alicia's heels clicked like hammers as she passed, but not hard enough to silence the giggles behind her. Every word pricked like a needle in her ear. She'd endured malicious rumors from the press before, but this was different. This came from within her own walls. In the boardroom, an older executive cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson, the company is under pressure. Leadership image is critical. I advise you to be cautious with personal matters." Each word struck her chest like a blow. She clenched her pen, her voice sharp but even. "I don't need anyone telling me how to live my life." But inside, she was torn. Last night, David's hand gripping hers in the darkness, it wasn't an illusion. It was the most real thing she had felt in years. And now, that truth was twisted into a weapon against her. Later that afternoon, Alicia stood before the mirror in her office. The reflection showed a strong, powerful, cold CEO, but beneath the mask she saw tired eyes and a longing for something simple, something true. The familiar question echoed again, clearer than ever. Will I go on as a lonely queen, or dare to step down and finally be a woman? The rumors didn't stay within the walls of the company. All it took was one phone camera, one anonymous post online, and the story. The powerful CEO caught up with the janitor, spread like wildfire. Monday morning, Alicia sat at her desk as her phone buzzed nonstop. Emails flooded in. News outlets screamed headlines. "Billion-dollar CEO seen getting close with low-level employee." "Power image crumbles. What's happening at Johnson Corp?" A blurry photo had surfaced. Alicia in the blackout, David steadying her by the arm. Just a single frame. Yet it sparked hundreds of speculative articles. In an emergency board meeting, voices clashed like knives. "We need a statement immediately. Protect the company's image at all costs. Perhaps suspend the janitor. Cut it off before it grows worse." Alicia sat still, hands clasped, her eyes like steel but her chest in turmoil. Suspend David? Cast him aside as if he were the problem? She knew better. David had done nothing wrong. The real wrong was a society eager to devour a black woman for daring to look vulnerable once. That afternoon, Alicia walked through the lobby. David was there, packing up his cleaning supplies. His eyes looked tired, but he didn't bow, didn't shrink. Around them, employees stared, whispered, some even smirked. Alicia passed by, forcing herself to look composed. But when their eyes met, she realized, in the middle of this storm, he was the only one not judging her. Just a quiet nod, steady, unshaken. Enough to make her heart tremble, and in that moment, she knew. The real storm was only beginning. 40th floor boardroom reeked of strong coffee and disinfectant. The directors sat around the long table, their eyes fixed on Alicia like invisible arrows. "Ms. Johnson," an older board member began, "we've fought for years to uphold Johnson Corp's reputation, but those photos and headlines are undermining everything. We need decisive action." "Specifics?" Alicia's tone was calm, but her gaze was icy. Another voice cut in. "Suspend the janitor. Better yet, fire him. It's the only way to prove you're not involved. The company must come first." Nods of agreement rippled around the table. Alicia sat upright, her chest tightening. Fire David. That would mean sacrificing him to cheap prejudice. It would mean denying the most genuine moment she'd had in years. The tension was thick enough to slice when the boardroom door opened. A steady voice rang out. "If firing me will save the company, I'll accept it." David stood at the doorway, mop in hand, uniform damp with sweat. The room fell silent in shock. Before anyone could speak, a younger director squinted and blurted out, "Wait, I know you. You were a lead engineer at Carver Industries. Why are you working as a janitor here?" Murmurs spread. Alicia froze. Carver Industries, a giant in tech, infamous for its brutal pace. A lead engineer there could not simply be a janitor. David gave a small smile, his gaze steady. "Yes, I was, but after the accident, I lost my wife. I lost everything. I chose this job because it lets me spend time with my daughter. money, titles. They mean nothing if I can't walk her to school every morning. The room sank into silence. Faces that once sneered now faltered. And Alicia. Her chest trembled. In that moment she realized David wasn't a liability to her career. He was a mirror, showing her a truth she had long buried, that the real worth of life often lies in the simplest things. The revelation that David had once been a lead engineer at Carver Industries spread like a bomb. The media, instead of cooling down, fanned the flames. Overnight, headlines exploded. From lead engineer to janitor, the secret story of David Carter. Past tragedy, a black CEO and a fallen man. What's the real truth? Some praised him as a devoted father who sacrificed everything, but most twisted the story, mocking, "If he was so talented, why is he mopping floors now?" Inside the company, whispers grew louder. Some looked at David with pity, others smirked, treating him like office gossip. Phrases like, "the CEO and her failed janitor engineer," floated through hallways, sticking to Alicia like a shadow. One afternoon, Alicia sat in her office when her assistant entered, voice trembling. "The media is demanding a live interview. They want answers. From you. And from David." Alicia froze, her chest tightening. She knew too well. Silence would look like admission. Speaking would turn every word into ammunition, and defending David, that would mean tearing down the iron CEO image she had built brick by brick. Meanwhile, in the lobby, David quietly kept working. His mop swayed rhythmically across the floor, as if the storm outside didn't exist. His daughter sat nearby, legs swinging, lost in her book. The simple scene felt like a reminder. Some values can't be measured by gossip or bought with money. From her office window, Alicia watched. And for the first time in years, she didn't know what to choose, the company or her heart. The press conference was scheduled in haste. The hall was packed with reporters, flashes exploding like gunfire, the air thick with tension. Alicia walked onto the podium in a sharp black suit, her face composed, but her eyes betraying fatigue. Cameras clicked furiously. A reporter shot to his feet, voice sharp. "Ms. Johnson, is it true you're romantically involved with a janitor? Don't you think this damages the company's image?" The room buzzed, every microphone thrust toward her. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the iron CEO's response. For a heartbeat, time stood still. Alicia glanced at the front row. David sat there with his daughter, holding her small hand. He wasn't looking around, wasn't afraid, just steady, calm, eyes fixed on her. Alicia drew a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice rang out clear and unwavering. "Yes, that man is part of my life. And he is not just a janitor, as you call him. He was once a talented engineer, a husband, and now a single father who gives everything for his daughter. I'm not ashamed of that. In fact, I'm proud." The hall erupted. Reporters gasped, fingers flying across keyboards. Board members in the front row froze, some scowling, others exchanging looks of disbelief. Alicia pressed on, her eyes blazing, her tone fierce, yet warm. "If this society believes a black woman has no right to love someone beneath her, then perhaps society needs to change. I don't need to apologize for being human. And I will never apologize for recognizing the worth of a man who gave up everything to raise his child." In that moment, Alicia knew her career might be threatened, the company's stock might waver, and the press would keep tearing her apart. But deep inside, for the first time in years, she felt free and true. David rose, meeting her gaze. No words, just a silent nod of gratitude. And in that silence, Alicia understood. No matter how long the storm raged, she had chosen the right path. The next morning, headlines dominated every paper. CEO admits relationship with janitor, scandal or statement. Alicia Johnson, from Iron Queen to a woman who dares to love. Online, the debate raged. One side sneered, "She's disgraced the company." Unbelievable, a CEO, and a janitor. But another side defended her. At least she's honest. At least she's brave. This isn't a scandal. It's love. Johnson Corp's stock dropped at the opening bell. The board scrambled into emergency meetings, voices urgent, fearful, but Alicia sat still, face calm. She knew this was the price of truth, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. What surprised her was what came next. Hundreds of emails and letters flooded the company. Women from across industries wrote, "Thank you for showing us that women can choose love without asking for permission." Some international outlets praised her as a new symbol, a woman breaking social boundaries. While the board argued, Alicia opened her laptop. The security feed showed David in the lobby, working quietly as always. While the storm raged, he mopped the floors steadily, his daughter beside him, swinging her legs as she read her book. Alicia smiled faintly. She realized that beyond the stock market, the media, the numbers, and the prejudice, the one constant was his calmness. And that, she thought, was the strength she needed. That afternoon, the boardroom felt like a battlefield. Directors sat around the long table, faces grim, voices clashing like swords. The stock keeps falling. Investors are losing confidence. If this continues, we can't hold our market position. We need a decisive solution. Perhaps it's time to discuss replacing the CEO. The word replace hung in the air like ice. Alicia sat tall at the head of the table, eyes steady, though inside she felt every blade pointed her way. Another director spoke bluntly. "No one denies your talent, Johnson, but image is everything. You let your private life compromise the brand. We can't take further risk." Tension thickened, ready to snap. But before Alicia could respond, a younger director, usually silent, suddenly spoke. "You're forgetting something. Public response isn't all negative. There's an unprecedented wave of support, too. A female CEO who dares to stand up for love and truth. That could be a brand strength." The room erupted, voices colliding. The conservative side pushed for sacrificing Alicia to save the company, while the progressive side argued this was a chance to redefine Johnson Corp as a more human, relatable brand. Meanwhile, outside, the world split in two. On Twitter, as Iron Queen Falls trended alongside "Where Love Is Not a Scandal." One camp mocked Alicia as a fool who ruined her career. The other hailed her as a symbol of courage. Sitting there, hearing every word, Alicia had only one question, echoing in her mind. Am I willing to risk everything, just to hold on to a truth that's mine? That night, the office was quiet. The skyscraper glowed dimly under amber lights, rain pattering against the windows. Alicia sat alone at her desk, hands clutching a stack of papers. The board's words still echoed in her mind. Replace the CEO. The company's image. Unacceptable risk. A soft knock broke the silence. She looked up. David stood in the doorway. No janitor's uniform tonight, just a worn shirt with rolled sleeves, his face tired but his eyes steady. "They're talking about firing me," Alicia said first, her voice like cooled steel. "And maybe firing me too." David was quiet for a moment, then stepped closer, setting a wet umbrella by the door. "If you lose everything because of me, I'll disappear. I can take it, but you—" "Stop," Alicia cut him off, her voice trembling. For the first time in years, it cracked. "Do you think I'm afraid of losing my title? I've spent my whole life clinging to that chair, proving I deserved it. But last night I realized it's just a cage. Do you understand? A gilded cage." David held her gaze for a long moment, then spoke slowly. "Alicia, I can't give you money, power, or the things a CEO is supposed to have. I only have one thing. The truth. And the truth is, I want to be with you. But I'll never force you to choose." Silence stretched, filled only by the rain and the thud of her heart. She looked at him, eyes burning with something she barely recognized: fear, longing, both at once. Her voice fell into a whisper, like a confession. I never knew being a woman could be this hard. David's smile was sad but warm, his eyes wrapping around her like an invisible embrace, and in that moment, Alicia realized the only choice left was to finally face her heart. The next morning, the board convened in a suffocating silence. Documents labeled CEO Replacement Plan sat neatly before each member, a cold reminder of what was at stake. The chairman rose, his voice deep and sharp. We've deliberated. The company's image is under severe strain. Johnson Corp. needs a clear decision. An older director spoke next, his eyes hard as steel. Vote. Keep Alicia Johnson or replace her. The room froze. Ballots were cast, pens tapped on the table. Alicia sat tall at the head, her back straight, face composed. But inside, her heart hovered over an abyss. When the tally came, murmurs erupted. Half voted to remove her. Half to keep her. Deadlock. The chairman frowned, ready to declare Alicia suspended, when suddenly the doors burst open. A young director rushed in, phone still in hand. Wait! Breaking news! Public support is turning. The hashtag, Love is not a scandal, just hit #1 nationwide. Major investors have announced they'll stay with us, saying authenticity is worth more than a polished image. The boardroom erupted. Faces once stern faltered into confusion. The chairman hesitated, then finally said, We cannot make a final decision yet. More time is required. Alicia sat still, but the faintest smile curved her lips. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, the scales weren't tipped entirely against her. Outside, through the glass wall, she saw David leading his daughter out of the building. He didn't look up, but the sight alone gave her strength. If this is my final war, Alicia thought, I'll fight not just for the company but for myself. A week after the press conference, the media storm hadn't calmed. It had gone global. International outlets ran the story, each with their own spin: love scandal or brave statement. Black woman CEO challenges corporate norms. Love or recklessness. Johnson Corp at a crossroads. TV networks in Europe and Asia dissected every detail. It was no longer just about Alicia and David. It had become a symbol of a larger debate. Personal freedom versus corporate image, class and race colliding in the 21st century. Inside the company, the atmosphere thickened. Younger employees openly voiced support, seeing Alicia as an inspiring figure. But among upper management, resistance grew sharper. Secret meetings, suspicious leaked emails, even whispers that some directors were talking to rivals to prepare a replacement plan if Alicia failed. One evening, after a grueling CNN interview, Alicia returned to her office and found a document left on her desk, an internal memo, unsigned, with a chilling header. Emergency plan. Proposal for interim CEO appointment if Alicia Johnson loses confidence. Her pulse quickened as she read. She wasn't surprised. She'd long suspected knives were out for her, but seeing it in writing still stung, not just for the title, but for what it meant. This battle wasn't just about her and David anymore. It was about truth versus lies, about those who dared to live authentically versus those who clung to power at all costs. She closed her eyes, drawing a long breath. Beyond the glass wall, the city glowed with a million lights. But inside her chest, the darkness pressed heavier than ever. And she knew the days ahead would only grow harsher. 2 days after discovering the betrayal memo, Alicia entered the boardroom with her face like stone. The senior managers were already seated, eyes shifting nervously. But before the meeting began, a young employee suddenly stood, startling everyone. "Excuse me, I need to say this." His voice trembled but held firm. "I know some people are working against you. But as someone who's been here 3 years, I want to say this. Many of us support Ms. Johnson. She's brave, and if this company fires her just for being honest, then we are the ones truly losing." The room went silent. Alicia looked at the young man, surprised. In his determined eyes, she saw the courage of a new generation, people no longer willing to live inside gilded cages. Later that day, Alicia received an international call. It was from a female CEO of a major European conglomerate, someone Alicia had met once at Davos. "Alicia," the woman's voice carried strength and warmth, "I followed your story. Don't let them break you. The world is changing, and women like us must prove that no one gets to dictate how we live and who we love." Those words lit a fire inside Alicia. For the first time in weeks, she felt she wasn't alone. That evening, as she left the building, she found David waiting outside, holding a coat in his hand. He offered it with a simple line, "No matter what happens, I'm here." Taking the coat, Alicia felt her heart tighten. Allies were emerging. Not always the most powerful, but the most genuine, and it was they who gave her the strength to keep walking forward. One gray morning, as Alicia entered the building, she felt the shift immediately. Whispers rippled through the halls. Some eyes held pity, others smirked openly. In the boardroom, the reason became clear. On the big screen was a leaked email blasted to the entire company. The board is considering appointing an interim CEO to protect Johnson Corp from crisis. Beneath it was a short list of replacements, and leading the list was none other than Alicia's own deputy, a man she had once trusted. "Ms. Johnson," he said smoothly, his tone polite but his eyes sharp, "we tried to believe in you, but now the best thing you can do for the company is step down voluntarily." Murmurs filled the room. Alicia sat tall, her gaze like steel. "So the real agenda finally comes to light," another director added with a thin smile. "No one wants this, but you've driven the company into crisis. This isn't personal. It's about Johnson Corp." Inside, rage boiled, but Alicia's face stayed composed. She saw it clearly. Now, this wasn't just opposition. It was an outright coup. Then, unexpectedly, the young employee who had defended her days ago stood again, his voice ringing in the tense room. "If Ms. Johnson leaves, we leave too. This company isn't held up by stock prices or titles. It's held up by people. And she's the reason many of us are still here." The room erupted in uproar. The traitors faltered, but Alicia's eyes stayed cold. Her heart burned, but her mind was clear. The battle was far from over, and she would not go quietly. That day, news of the internal coup spread like wildfire through the company. Employees whispered anxiously, unsure where Johnson Corp was headed. The board assumed Alicia would step down quietly. They were wrong. That afternoon, Alicia called for a full company assembly. Over 1,000 employees filled the hall, tension thick in the air. On stage, Alicia walked out. No notes, no slides, just her and the truth. She paused, scanning the room. Then her voice rang clear. "I know you've heard the rumors, about me, about this company, about my personal choices, and yes, I won't deny it. I fell in love with a man who isn't wealthy, isn't powerful, but he taught me something I never learned in all my years as CEO, how to be human." Silence blanketed the hall. Alicia pressed on, her voice gaining force. "If this company wants a CEO polished for the press but hollow inside, I'm not that person. But if this company wants a leader who knows courage, who knows honesty, and who will face the storm to protect her people, then I am that person." Applause erupted from the back rows. Slowly, more employees rose, clapping louder and louder until it drowned out every murmur of doubt. The board members in the front row paled. They hadn't expected the Iron Queen to turn weakness into strength, gossip into fire. Alicia finished, her voice steady and low. "I will not walk away. I'm staying, not for this title, but for you. Because Johnson Corp isn't just a corporation. It's a family of people who dare to stand together. The hall exploded in cheers, and in that moment, Alicia knew she had seized back control. The war wasn't over, but for the first time she wasn't fighting it alone. After Alicia's powerful speech, Johnson Corp stabilized. For the moment. Employees now looked at her differently, not just as a CEO, but as a source of inspiration. Yet while she was regaining trust inside, a new storm was brewing outside. Sterling Global, a longtime rival, seized the moment. They launched a flashy media campaign aimed squarely at Johnson Corp, plastering ads with the slogan, "We choose professionalism, not scandal." At the same time, Sterling announced a new product targeting Johnson Corp's core market. The press pounced, framing it as the professional giant versus the scandal queen. Johnson Corp's stock wavered again. The board, though rattled by employee loyalty, now had fresh ammunition. "Ms. Johnson, this isn't just about public opinion anymore. This is about losing our market. If we don't act fast, we're finished." That night, Alicia sat alone in her office. The city, lights flickering beyond the glass. Reports lay on her desk, numbers bleeding red. Her chest felt heavy. Then she looked down. In the lobby, David and his daughter waited for her, patient as always. He glanced up and smiled. Calm, steady, without fear. That smile reminded Alicia she wasn't just a CEO fighting for a company. She was a woman learning to fight for her own happiness. And in that moment, a fierce resolve ignited within her. "If Sterling wants to turn my pain into a weapon, then I'll turn the truth itself into my power. This time, I'll fight not just as a CEO, but as myself." The emergency meeting buzzed with tension. Alicia stood before a giant screen, market share graphs bleeding downward, her voice sharp. "Sterling is targeting our weakness, outdated product innovation. They think we'll be too distracted by scandal to focus on creativity." "They're wrong," a director shot back. "What are you suggesting? We don't have a team strong enough to launch new tech in such a short time." Silence thickened. Then Alicia turned to the door. David entered. No janitor's uniform, just a plain shirt, holding a worn folder of schematics. Murmurs swept the room. Board members exchanged startled looks. Alicia's tone was firm. "This is David Carter. He was once a lead engineer at Carver Industries, heading research on a materials technology Sterling still hasn't fully replicated." David spread the old blueprints across the table, his eyes steady. "I don't have much left, but knowledge stays, and I believe Johnson Corp can merge my experience with its resources to leap ahead instead of chasing Sterling's shadow." The boardroom erupted. Some directors protested furiously. "Impossible! A janitor leading a tech project? That's absurd." But Alicia cut them down, voice like steel. "No, that's truth. You've been too busy guarding titles to remember where real strength lies. In creating value. And I intend to prove it." The room fell silent. For the first time, Alicia and David stood not only against gossip, but at the heart of the company's survival plan. And in David's calm gaze, Alicia saw not just steadiness, but a fire. The very fire that might turn the tide of war. Right after the meeting, Alicia handpicked a small team. Young, passionate employees and a few sidelined. Engineers dismissed by conservative managers. She called them Team Phoenix, fire reborn from ashes. In an old basement lab, David spread out the blueprints and formulas he had salvaged from his days at Carver Industries. His voice was calm, but firm. "Sterling is powerful because of money and numbers, but their weakness is size. Slow, rigid. We're smaller, but if we're agile and bold, we can outpace them." The young engineers looked at him with mixed doubt and excitement. One woman asked, "But we only have weeks, while they've prepared for years." David smiled. "Exactly. That's why we can't follow. We create what they've never imagined." Alicia stood back, watching silently. For the first time, she saw David differently. Not the man with a mop, but a true leader, eyes burning, commanding the room with quiet authority. Meanwhile, news from Sterling crashed in waves. The press predicted Johnson Corp was finished. Investors piled on pressure by the hour, and the board whispered venom, calling Alicia reckless for gambling the company on a janitor's wild idea. Late at night, after the team left, Alicia and David remained in the lab. She watched him bent over the schematics, neon light tracing the determination on his face. Her heart trembled. This was why she stayed, why she fought, why she chose to love. David looked up, catching her gaze. He gave a faint smile, voice low and steady. "Don't worry, Phoenix always rises from fire." Alicia smiled back. Deep inside, a new belief took root. This counterattack wouldn't just save the company, it would save them both. After weeks of relentless work, Team Phoenix finally had a breakthrough. In the cramped basement lab, the test machine beeped, a green light. The room erupted in cheers. David held up a thin sheet of the new material, pride burning in his eyes. "We did it. 30% lighter, 50% stronger. Sterling doesn't have this." The young engineers hugged and shouted like they'd just won a championship. Alicia stood back, her heart swelling. This wasn't just a product, it was proof that Johnson Corp could rise again. But the triumph was short-lived. That evening, a major newspaper dropped a bomb. Johnson Corp's secret lab accused of using stolen Carver Industries data. Blurry photos showed David entering the building late at night. Sterling immediately released a statement accusing Johnson Corp of technology theft and threatening international legal action. Inside the company, chaos erupted. In the emergency meeting, a furious director shouted, "I warned you, betting on a janitor has doomed us. Ms. Johnson, you're dragging this entire corporation into the abyss." Alicia clenched her fists, eyes locking on David. He didn't flinch. His voice was calm but resolute. "If they want war, we fight with truth. I didn't steal anything. I reclaimed what I created, with my own mind and sweat." His words rang like a bell. Alicia felt a surge of conviction. She rose, her voice slicing through the noise. "If Sterling wants to strike first, then we'll go public. No more hiding. We'll show the world that real innovation can't be buried by rumors or lies." The room fell silent, heavy with anticipation. The war had officially begun. The International Tribunal Hall in Geneva blazed with lights. Hundreds of reporters packed the room, cameras broadcasting live to millions worldwide. The hearing between Johnson Corp and Sterling was hailed as a historic showdown, one that would decide not only the fate of two corporations, but the very line between innovation and ethics in the 21st century. Sterling arrived with a legion of lawyers, suits sharp, eyes gleaming with confidence. Their spokesperson spoke with cutting precision. "We accuse Johnson Corp of using technology developed at Carver Industries, where Mr. David Carter once worked. This is clear intellectual property theft." Pens scratched furiously. Investors nodded grimly. Across the table, Alicia sat composed, though a storm raged inside. When her turn came, she rose, her voice resonating. "Johnson Corp stole nothing. We advanced on the knowledge and experience of the very man who created this technology. And here is the proof." She gestured. David stepped forward, holding an old, time-worn folder. He opened the pages, voice steady and unwavering. "These are the original designs I created years ago. Carver abandoned the project after my wife's death, but I never abandoned my own mind. Nothing here was stolen. It was mine from the beginning." Gasps rippled through the hall. Some reporters froze mid-sentence. Cameras zoomed in on David's face, eyes blazing with truth and pride that could not be buried. Alicia stepped. Beside him, her voice fierce. "Sterling wants to bury truth under power and money, but we'll prove that innovation cannot be bought, and that passion for work and for people is the only value that lasts." Flashes burst like fireworks. The air was taut, electric. The world seemed to hold its breath. just as the tide seemed to turn toward Johnson Corp. Sterling's lawyer shot up, voice sharp as a blade. If Mr. Carter is truly clean, then explain this. Why was the Phoenix material data found on Carver's servers, with traces showing it was copied only after you left the company? Gasps spread. Cameras swung to David. Reporters whispered, "Evidence of theft? Was it fraud all along?" David froze for a beat, tension tight on his face. Alicia's eyes, locked on him, cold, fierce, but laced with worry. If they didn't answer this now, the company would be branded a thief. David drew a long breath, then faced the microphones. "Yes, the data was on Carver's servers, but you forget one thing. I created it. I filed those designs before I left. Carver abandoned them. The night my wife died, I was cast out from every project, every lab, as if I had never existed. But my mind, my heart, stayed there." Hot paused, his voice dropping, revealing a secret he had long buried. "That night, I copied the data, not to steal, but to keep a fragment of the life I lost. That work was mine, built with my team, with my wife's belief in me. If you call it theft, then I only stole back my own life." The hall fell silent. Not a keystroke, not a whisper. Cameras zoomed in on David's reddened eyes. Truth laid bare not through logic, but through human pain. Alicia stepped forward, laying a hand on his shoulder. Her voice rang with pride. "And that truth is what gave birth to Phoenix Material, today. Not the product of a cold corporation, but the work of a single father. A man who knew loss, and still chose to rise from ashes." Applause broke out from the back, scattered at first, then swelling, wave upon wave. Reporters, observers, even some international investors rose to their feet, clapping. Sterling froze. Their weapon backfired, transforming into a moment that left the world shaken and moved. After David's confession, the hearing tilted sharply in Johnson Corp's favor. Observers whispered this could mark a historic shift in how innovation and justice were defined. Alicia felt a current of energy surge, as if justice itself was on their side. But Sterling wasn't finished. Their lead lawyer rose slowly, wearing a cold smile. "Very moving, but if we're speaking of truth, perhaps we should also revisit the past of Ms. Alicia Johnson herself. A past not nearly as clean as she claims." The room erupted in murmurs. Alicia froze, her heart sinking. The lawyer flicked a switch, and the screen filled with old clippings. Photos of a younger Alicia in rundown neighborhoods, police, records of her being detained during a protest against racial discrimination over 15 years ago. "Is this the so-called Iron CEO you idolize?" he sneered. "A troublemaker once jailed for disorderly conduct, climbing to power by painting herself a victim. Is this the role model for global business?" Chaos broke out. Reporters snapped photos, typed furiously. Johnson Corp's board. Members paled. Alicia sat still, fists clenched, memories flooding back. The tear gas, the shouts, her brown hands cuffed and shoved into a police van. A past she had buried, terrified it would one day be used as a weapon. David leaned close, whispering, "They're trying to silence you with your scars. But Alicia, scars can be strength." She closed her eyes for a beat, then stood. Her voice rang out, trembling yet unbreakable. "Yes, that was me. I was arrested. I marched. I was handcuffed for daring to say our lives mattered. And those days taught me one thing. No one can take away your voice, unless you give it up yourself." The hall shook. Some eyes welled with tears. And in that instant, Alicia knew. Sterling had cut deep, but in doing so, they had freed her. They had forced her to bear the truth she had long hidden. The hall buzzed with chaos. Half the room whispered doubt, the other half stared at Alicia, waiting. Cameras zoomed close. Sweat glistened on her brow, but her eyes blazed. She stepped to the microphone, drawing a deep breath. Her voice rang out, no longer trembling but unshakable. Yes, I was once a girl in handcuffs, once branded, a troublemaker. But you know what? That moment made me who I am today. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, devalued, for your skin, your gender, your class. And that's why I swore, I will never let anyone be silenced just because they don't belong to the right room. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. Reporters fell silent. Investors held their breath. Under my leadership, Johnson Corp will not only build products. We will build opportunities. For the forgotten, for ideas abandoned, for the Davids of this world, people with brilliance cast aside because they don't fit a seat of power. If that's a crime, then I am guilty. But it's also why I stand here proud. Applause erupted. First scattered, then crashing like thunder. Some international observers rose to their feet, cheering. Cameras captured Alicia standing tall, her eyes burning like fire. From the back, David watched, pride swelling in his chest. He knew. This was no longer just their fight. This was the moment a woman turned pain into power, scars into triumph, and in that instant, the balance shifted. No one called her a scandal CEO anymore. They called her something else. The woman who dared to defy the world. The thunder of applause still echoed through the hall. Alicia stood tall, breathing deep as camera flashes lit her face. For the first time in years, she felt no need to hide. David stepped forward quietly, standing beside her. No words were spoken, yet the world could see. This was not just a CEO and a janitor, but two people who dared to stand on the side of truth. As the tribunal recessed, Alicia knew the battle was far from over. Sterling would strike again. Her own board might never fully stand by her. And public opinion, fickle as the wind, could turn without warning. But in her eyes now, there was no fear, only fire. Of conviction, of pride, and of a love she could no longer deny. This fight has changed me, and perhaps it's only the beginning. The giant screens dimmed. Outside, reporters pressed forward, lights flashing once more. The future remained uncertain, but for Alicia and David, the path ahead was one they would walk together.